We've got a curriculum, a fixed kind of set curriculum, which is, well, what, the national curriculum, but do we really need to follow that when there are more pressing and more important things that we perhaps need to be focusing on? That for me was that was a standout moment where I thought, wow, what we're doing here is really something special.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Culture Burger, the second. I don't know how to say this, Andy. I always want to say slice of the burger, but that's not really right, is it?
No, it'd be a cake.
Exactly, the Culture Cake.
Yeah.
That's series 2, isn't it? I think.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm here with Andy Sprakes. Hello, Andy, and welcome.
Hello.
So, Andy, first of all, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what your role is at the XP Trust.
Yep, sure, no problem. So I'm Andy Sprakes, and I was the co-founder of XP School, and then I was obviously the head of XP School, and then we opened XP East, and then we've got loads of other schools who've joined our trust, and I've now kind of morphed into a very grand-sounding job role, which is Chief Academic Officer. So I kind of my role is really to work with our students and our staff on curriculum and making sure that, our slice of the burger is sizzling.
Excellent. I like that. I think it's fair to say that our curriculum is a little bit different here at XP, but it's obviously it's founded on the principles of expeditionary learning. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've obviously had a little bit of an overview of the Culture Burger so far. And as the Chief Academic Officer, you're very much in charge of this first burger, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it's got this heading of activism. It's quite an interesting heading for an academic sort of setting, because obviously activism makes us think of, like Gwyn said in the first episode, sort of people marching with placards. But what is activism in the context of our schools?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And when we first opened the school, we wanted our students to be agents for social change. That was a cornerstone of what we wanted our students to be. And as you quite rightly said, we've based our curriculum on the expeditionary learning model from the US, and so activism really is at the very heart of what we want students to do and what we want students to be. And so all of our expeditions have a product at the end of it. So the learning is focused around acquiring knowledge so that you can do some good with that knowledge and you can create something with that knowledge.
Right, okay.
And so when we first opened our first expedition, the very first thing that we did was an expedition called What Makes a Successful Community.
Yeah. Because
what we wanted to really kind of explore with our students and with ourselves really as well was about that idea of where we are, of our community. And if we want our students to be agents for change, for positive social change, what better place to start than outside your own front door, in your own community? And that's still true. So a lot of the work that we do on expeditions is at the heart of it is in our community, the community of Doncaster. So we looked at what makes a successful community, and the kids explored that kind of concept, and they looked at the kind of infrastructure that's needed to build a community. We looked at the history of community, and then the students did some really beautiful writing about what they felt made a successful community. So most recently, in the work that we've done around our design principles, this kind of idea kept bubbling up all the time of activism. Yeah. Of students acquiring knowledge to do good with that knowledge. Yeah. And acquiring skills as well to do good work with those. And that was kind of representative, really, of the work that we'd done right at the very start, because the kids then wrote this really beautiful book where they did some line drawings that kind of connected to their writing, and then we had extracts from their writing in the book. And it was a very noble product, really, as a first go. We critiqued it, and we did all the things that we do at XP to try and make it as beautiful as possible. But that idea of activism was there even then at the very start. So when we've distilled our design principles, and when we've looked at why we're doing what we're doing, it's quite interesting that the most recent conversations were around the kind of arc that we have in our expeditions, and even within case studies within expeditions. And there was kind of this emerging idea of, we want our kids to think about where we are now, so our community. So we explore that.
Yeah.
Then once we've done that, we kind of lift our heads up a little bit and we look outward. And so we look at the world around us. And so we might start, and we did that with the successful community. We started off with our, let's have a look, let's go out on some field work and let's look at what is our community successful?
Yeah, of
the
course.
kids are saying, there's loads of litter and things like that. Then we kind of looked outward, and we started to look at, well, what happens when communities break down? And so we looked at, why do people riot, and what kind of things cause people to do that. So we looked kind of outward, and then we finished on looking inward, and the kids reflecting on that learning and thinking about what they could do to make their community a better place. So activism, I suppose, is the opposite of passivity, isn't it? We
of course,
we don't want our kids to be passive learners.
Yeah.
We don't want our kids to just acquire learning so that they can pass exams, or and that's a very one-dimensional way of learning. Although we do want our kids to pass exams and do really well academically, and they do. So activism has been rooted in our curriculum right from the very start, really.
Yeah.
And there are lots of examples how we've developed that, from that very honourable start.
Yeah.
To how we've developed it further, and where we've got to now in terms of making our kids activists. And I would say, we've still got a long way to go on that. So some of our learning is representational.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And the kids create beautiful stuff, and we present that, which is really good. But we also want that work to have legacy.
Yes.
An impact. If you talk about agency, then that there has to be impact, and a positive impact. Of course.
So I guess as well that it's, if I remember rightly, in terms of the actual sort of diagram and the sort of description of the activism, it's the hands, it's the things that we do. And I think that can obviously translate to quite a few things, can't it? So obviously, like you say, our expeditions always culminate in a final product. They always culminate in something that is tangible, that can be shown to the wider world. Now, obviously, the product of that could be a change in somebody's sort of way of thinking, or way of sort of perception of their own community. Obviously, like you say, that book does exist, and you can still get it now. And obviously, it's our first sort of expedition and stuff like that. But would you argue that the students who were involved in that first expedition, they took away something? They took away something that they made themselves, whether it's building a sense of confidence, or whether it's gathering awareness of your community around you. It's like, it's not always making something specifically physical, is it?
No, not at all. And activism manifests itself in many different ways and in many different forms. I mean, there was a really interesting. I mean, all the things that you've just said are true. Our kids presented their learning. They talked about it. They thought deeply about community and what it meant, and that very abstract concept. And they started to kind of try and make that concrete and say, well, what can we do to make our community better? What can we do to celebrate our community? Because there's lots in our local community that we didn't even know existed that is really fantastic. So it's kind of that enlightenment almost as well, that students were looking at our local area in a different way, and in many ways a much more positive way. So activism it impacts on your conceptual thinking. It also impacts on your understanding, and then also on like I said, agency.
Yeah.
So that that absolutely we want our students to have an holistic view of who they are, the world around them, and what they can do to change that world, but change that world for the better. And you're absolutely right. The idea of activism, if you link it into our habits of work and learning, it's the work hard, it's the what we do, it's the hand.
Yeah.
But what we do can be, it doesn't have to be a physical product always. It can be a speech or an idea or a feeling that students have and that they then take away with them.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to sort of draw on, isn't it? Because there must be students who, if XP started in 2014, there must be students now who have gone into the community, if you like. I know that our schools are built within our communities, but who have gone out into the world of work. Are there any alumni? So there is a alumni project, isn't there, where we work?
That's
with?
right.
What's it called? Is it the D6?
It's the XP alumni.
Yeah.
But from the XP, we've used some of our XP alumni.
Yeah.
To be part of what we call D6,
Yeah.
which was an idea that we nicked from Matthew Moss High School in Rochdale, who are doing great work on, allowing the kids to use the resource of school on a Saturday,
right,
and
okay.
use that really flexibly and creatively, not coming to school and it's an extra day of lessons.
Sure.
But students leading their own learning, focusing on areas of perhaps the curriculum or of personal interest that they want to, but just being able to do that in a safe, warm, well-resourced space.
Sure.
So our alumni, so the students who are pioneer students, actually, who are now in year 13 in various places across the borough, have come back into school, and they've been mentors on that programme for us. Unfortunately, that's been disrupted a little bit with current circumstances.
Of course.
But they've done some absolutely fabulous work with our year 11s to just help them to lead their own learning and to form study groups and focus on areas that they need to develop. So that's happening, and I see the alumni growing and people want to contribute, they want to come back, they want to help, because I think we've instilled in those students, who are great kids anyway, but that sense of pride in the community that we've built here and the culture that we've built here. I mean, there are, you kind of get apocryphal tales of, when students have gone for interviews, that they kind of stand out because of the confident way that they can speak, that they can present themselves, that they can articulate who they are, and the way that they can articulate their learning, and that's self-evident. When you see kids who are at our school now, when they are talking, and Oris is a really, really strong and important part of what we do at XP across the trust, is getting the kids to speak confidently in front of different audiences, and to speak, meaningfully about their learning, and also what they are going to do or what they have done with that learning, which again links back to rather neatly to that idea of activism. Yeah,
of course. And I think there must be, I mean, obviously in all these sort of the pupils you've seen, and obviously like you've taught for a long time, haven't you? So
not that long, Jeff.
Not long.
How old do you think I am? I'm only 28.
Yeah. That's amazing.
I had a milk round. Yeah.
I think obviously like you'll have seen, because before XP, You taught, didn't you?
I did.
And you'll have seen elements of this throughout your career.
Yeah.
And there'll be pupils who sort of stood out to you and stuff like that. Is there a story? Is there somebody from XP who you think, right, well, they went through and they started in this situation and maybe they were, without this sense of activism, they wouldn't have necessarily grown in the same way? Is there anyone who stands out to you?
Well, I mean, there are so many stories, really, and so many students, you know, who I could focus on, you know, and I wouldn't want to name them particularly, but, you know, the students who have come to us who had very, very low confidence and, you know, were reticent to speak in front of their peers, never mind an audience, and who through that idea of crew that we have, which is also part of activism, and you know, we can touch upon that later perhaps, but through the concept of crew and being supported by their peers and by their crew leader and by the culture that we have here, that gradually those students step up and begin to see things in themselves that they didn't even know were there. And they're some of the kind of really emotive moments, you know, when you see a student who has been reluctant to speak, who perhaps even has not taken part in a presentation of learning, who is supported by his peers or her peers, and then they do it.
Yeah.
And they kind of break that ice, you know. And once they do that, there's no stopping the water, is there? It's kind of, you know, that's when they really begin to grow. And there are countless examples of that with our students. And also, you know, students who have been in the school, who've had opportunities through our curriculum, through engaging with experts, going out on purposeful field work where we kind of learn things on the field work that we then bring back into the classroom, and then we talk to experts about that learning, where that, you know, they've engaged with, you know, really important people and asked really important people really searching and difficult questions.
Yeah.
You know, that have furthered their learning. So there are loads of examples, Jeff, that you know, you can think of the students who've been down to Parliament, who's you know, Grace who went down to Parliament to talk about the work that we were doing at the school, and you know, she sat in front of a select committee and taught a panel from a select committee, an invited panel, I think it was. You know, sat on the stage. She was 13 years old and spoke eloquently about, you know, what we were doing at the school and how important it was that we were developing character. And that through the development of character and through the cross-subject expeditions that we do and the connections that we were making, that was enhancing the beautiful work that she was doing, so the work hard, the activism. And then as a direct result of that, it was impacting on her academic success. And, you know, and everybody, you know, politicians were there, and the great and the good were blown away by how eloquent she was, and you know, and the fact that she was talking about her school and her learning, and you know, quite amazing things I've seen. You know, I've seen. I mean, there's one story that I tell about the conference that we do at XP, which we call Expose, and a couple of years ago, I was asked to. You know, I thought, well, I better do a session on, you know, on Key Stage 4, on expeditions in Key Stage 4, because that's a question that we often get a lot, Jeff, is the kind of, you know, I can see how you can do this at Key Stage 3, but how do you do it when kids start doing exams and stuff?
Of course.
You know, so we thought, well, we'll do a session on that, and I thought I'll do the session on the Vikings, because we're doing a really great cross-curricular expedition on the Vikings, where the kids were studying the Vikings for their history GCSE.
Yeah.
We wanted to connect that with some science work, so we looked at, believe it or not, chemical bonding alongside that, and we also wanted the kids to do some creative writing, because they had to write a story in their English language GCSE. And anyway, so the kids actually created a booklet. They went to the Yorkshire Museum, they selected an artefact. You know, we kind of studied the time period that Viking artefact came from. We did some field work in York and at the Jorvik, and then we came back and we looked at the chemical properties, why had that, why had those artifacts survived, etc. And then we wrote an historically accurate narrative based on the historical knowledge that the kids had acquired, and we worked with some experts on the authenticity of that, and they created this wonderful booklet. And then we went to the Viking Festival in York, and we went out and we shared our work with the general public, and we were talking about the work that we'd done, and the booklet was for sale, or you could donate. And so the kids were raising money as well for future expeditions to bring back in. And anyway, so on the expose, I thought that'd be a great one to talk about.
Sure. That's Raiders, isn't it? That's
Raiders Invaders.
Of course it is, yeah.
And, I thought we'd do this anyway. It got to about 2 days before and I'd not really planned anything. So I thought, actually, it might be a good idea to get the kids to talk about it rather than me droning on. So I asked 3 of our students who'd done that to come back and talk about the work that they'd done. And it was a stroke of genius, really, because it meant that I didn't have to do anything. Because the kids just came and spoke. This is a national, international conference in a seminar where they spoke about their learning, and it was just phenomenal how they presented what they'd learned. It was beyond anything that I could comprehend, really, in terms of what they'd done. But they talked about the Volga Vikings and how their artifact had connected to, the study that they'd done in history. And so through doing the study of the artifact, it actually strengthened and deepened their knowledge of the history. And when they'd come to the chemical bonding question on their GCSE in science, they remembered that because they'd remembered the Volga Vikings, and they spoke about the agency, their activism in engaging with an adult community, talking about their work and how through articulating that deepened their understanding, made them remember it, and they'd also produced this beautiful booklet as well, which was a legacy of that work. And I can remember one of the delegates saying, I closed my eyes for a moment and I couldn't distinguish between the student and the teacher in terms of what people were saying, and that for me was that was a standout moment where I thought, wow, what we're doing here is really something special.
Yeah, and I think this is probably quite a nice thing to lead into, but to me, there's a few things that you've mentioned. We've talked about, we can talk about crew, we can talk about expeditions, we can talk about the legacy, we can talk about public celebration, but it strikes me that it kind of leads into a nice question of like, how do you shape an activist? And I think quite a few of those things are the answer to that question, are they not? Yeah. In that, obviously, you can talk about how that expedition, that like a specific expedition might sort of make switch a student onto that way of thinking, that sort of way of learning, if you like, and that crew with the support of your peers, it's there. Is obviously when you're shaping this curriculum, you're working with staff and stuff like that. Is it sort of inherently obvious to you which staff members sort of have obviously been shaped by certain types of activism in their own lives? Is it interesting when people come and say, I want to do an expedition on X, Y, Z, and you go, all right, okay,
Yeah, or sometimes their lack of activism as well, their lack of opportunity, but staff are obviously really interested in certain topics and certain concepts, and they tend to be those things that are at the forefront of all of our minds actually at the moment. We've been looking at our curriculum and how we shape the curriculum and what we focus on in our curriculum quite deeply recently. So certain things emerge, don't they? And quite right too. But the climate emergency is really prevalent at the moment, and and we've got a curriculum, a fixed kind of set curriculum, which is the national curriculum, but do we really need to follow that when there are more pressing and more important things that we perhaps need to be focusing on?
Sure.
Our kids need to deeply understand the climate emergency because they're the ones who are going to fix it, we hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's quite urgent. that work. So we need to be focusing on that in school.
Yeah.
You know, the issues around prejudice and injustice that exist in the world, in all the shapes and forms that injustice takes. So in terms of race, in terms of poverty and class, are things that we focus on with our students because they're the things that matter. They're important.
Yeah.
They're the things that they're going to have to engage with in order to become better citizens and better people and shape the world to be better. So staff do come with passions around that, and I think they then ignite student passion too. And I've seen it within my own daughter. That one kind of real standout expedition that we did quite recently, really 18 months ago, a couple of years ago, was the expedition Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Yeah.
Where the students created the film,
Yeah.
working alongside you, Jeff,
Of course.
about migrancy and the impact of migrancy into our local community, but also the stories of those migrants and why they'd come to be in Doncaster and the kind of struggles that they faced. And what was really kind of stand out for me about that expedition, and the best expeditions are always like this, is where we engage with other human beings.
Yeah, of course.
And so those guys who came into school and told their stories to our students, and then sat down and played games and chatted to our students socially.
Yeah.
Was deeply moving and had a deep impact on those young people, including my daughter, because it made her understand that these were just people like me or you.
Yeah.
And they had lives and loves, and they had families that they'd often not seen for years and years, and it kind of it built that empathy in our students to understand that. And then we looked at attitudes.
Yeah.
And and looked at the press and how the press report migrancy and as immigrants, and this negative kind of view of people who are often in desperate situations. And so the students were then able to really deeply understand, the struggles that these people had, and then see them in a completely different light. And I think that's the kind of thing that when that happens in our expeditions, it's kind of life changing for both parties. I think I think those guys, the guys from the Conversation Club who'd come from various parts of the world, Syria, Africa, etc., got a lot out of engaging culturally with our students as well. And the kids then went on to raise money, really purposeful, to buy the Conversation Club bikes.
Yeah.
And then the Conversation Club sent us some photographs of, the people who they were working with who'd got bikes because they needed those to get around Doncaster, because obviously they've hardly got any money to get around, to go to job interviews and the like. And that was, that was just so powerful. And then to make the film and articulate their learning journey, to say this is where we were.
Yeah.
We looked up. We kind of got lots of knowledge about this subject, and then it made us reflect on who we are and what we can do, how we can actively intervene in this. And you can see that we've done that with our work with Age UK, so with the elderly community, and the beautiful conversations and understanding and empathy that you get when our students have gone to care homes and spoken to their clients, and they've told their stories, and then we've represented their stories and gone back in and given them kind of these kindness boxes and the impact that's had, unbelievable. And like I say, there are lots of examples of that where we humanise what we do. I think that's where we get the highest return, really, and that's what changes kids' perceptions of themselves and what they can do to make things better.
I think that's the thing. I think when certainly my experience of working on Should I Stay or Should I Go was an eye-opening one, because it struck me that all of us were learning on that experience. The staff that I work with on that, we would come away from the same situations with the kids where they'd been talking to migrants at the Conversation Club and hearing these very sort of harrowing stories, and really just being tremendously compassionate and sort of asking the right questions and coming away, and we'd for the documentary, we'd sit them down and we'd sort of say, you know, how did that make you feel, and what have you learned today? And they'd just sort of articulate it in a really normal way. And I certainly came away from those experiences being like, I don't know how they can just be so controlled about this, because I was learning on that experience. I thought it was going to be a situation where I'd sort of go in with the camera and capture what was there, and I got pulled in to that activism from the kids. I heard the stories of the migrants, but also just the way that they were interacting. And I remember being in this space here where we are sat now, where they were sort of playing games and stuff like that, and just watching it naturally unfold. And it wasn't one of these things where it was, I don't know how to say it. I think it was just the next natural thing they were going to do. They came in, they had the conversations with them in the first place. They'd been to the Conversation Club and they'd learned about sort of their sort of individual plight. And then, you know, they were saying, well, obviously they want something fun to do. So why wouldn't we invite them in to play games? Why wouldn't we do that? And what's the best way for us to organise this? And just making use of the space. And it was just a lovely morning. And I think to think that that's just one of the things that will shape those students as they come through these schools is just incredible.
And I think as well, Jeff, that, you know, if you consider our design principles, you know, we were building community there.
Yeah.
You know, the kids were, through the building that community, they were being activists.
Yeah.
They were leading.
Yeah.
Because they were working with you, you know, constructing the film and giving input to that. They were designing the questions that they were going to ask the Conversation Club, and they were listening to the stories, you know, from migrants. So you'd got your equity there, because it was about, you know, opening our eyes up to, you know, disadvantage and struggle and prejudice and all of that, you know. And then we told the story. Yeah, of course. And we told it through that fantastic film, which was, again, you know, premiered at the Cast Theatre in Doncaster. So it was a kind of prestigious event. Those kids who'd been involved in that film, you know, felt they'd done something of worth and of value. And I know that. Yeah. You know, I know. So another example of how, you know, our design principles kind of manifest in a really concrete way is through an expedition that we've done previously called From the Ground Up. Ah, yes, of course. And the mining book. Yeah, absolutely. So the guiding question for that is, what does the community of Doncaster owe to the miners? Yeah. So again, that kind of, you know, allowed the students to think very deeply about community. Yeah. Because Doncaster, obviously, you know, our local area is seeped in the culture of the mines. Lots of pit villages are in this area. So it allowed those students to kind of understand, you know, the social and historical importance of the mining industry, but also the kind of cultural importance of that too, and the struggles that people had who went down the pit. You know, it was a hard job, you know, and a dangerous one, and people put their lives at risk daily to hew coal so that we could power the country. And so getting the kids to think about that and about the science, the geology, the strata, the rock formations, why, you know, this area is a mining area because of the kind of geological features that have formed over time. And then the kind of social histories again, telling the stories, you know, working with people from our communities, using them as experts to kind of really understand their lives, their sacrifices, what they did, their contribution to building community in our areas. And, you know, and then that then was culminated through the students creating this really beautiful book that then captures those stories and captures that learning, and becomes a legacy for those important stories that need to be told, and also about the class struggle as well, and the miners' strike and how that was deeply affected our communities and still does. And so the kind of legacy around that product is really powerful and highly authentic. I mean, it was or is still for sale at Waterstones in the local bookshop in Doncaster, and has sold very, very well. I mean, I think it was one of their best-selling local history books, alongside another book that we've done about what do we owe to the railways. So there's our design principles in action and in realisation as well. And it's really important work, and the students remember that. And the reason I raised that expedition really is that most recently, we're hoping to open a school up in the northeast, and we've been kind of pushing stuff out on social media about the work that we do as we're recruiting up there. And one of the things that was pushed out was from the ground up was that book and some pages from that book, and we got a tweet actually from an existing parent, student in year 11, who actually said, this was really important work. My father and grandfather were miners, and I've cried many times when I've come to presentations of learning at XP, but this was the one that I'll never forget. It will stay with me forever. And so, the work that students have done there and the impact that it's had on their parents and on the wider community is really visceral and has legacy.
Because we have a catchment of all over Doncaster, don't we, with this school, and obviously our primary schools are around, and obviously we've sort of drawn on that with Thorn, certainly, haven't we, as well, with Greentop. How many stories, just as an example, I'm sure we could talk about this with loads of different expeditions, but how many stories in From the Ground Up came from within the families of students, just out of interest?
I don't think many, actually. Okay. But obviously, students did have their family own members. Stories, family members who, you've kind of got to, our parents were probably the children of miners rather than miners themselves.
Got you.
Because the pits had closed, hadn't they? Really from after the miners' strike, from 85 up into that period of the early 90s, we saw the pit closures. So that kind of generation of miners began to diminish.
Of course.
So a lot of the parents, though, obviously, as a parent who tweeted, it was very close to them. Very close to me.
Yeah,
I come from a mining community. My granddad was a deputy down the pit at the Yorkshire Main Colliery. My dad started his apprenticeship at the coal board as a bricklayer. So these are stories that are close to me. As well as being close to our families as well, and they've obviously, that period of time shaped me significantly. I would remember going on the bus up to Edlington to see my grandma, and there were the pickets outside Yorkshire Main, and I was kind of 14, 15, very impressionable, and saw lots of the things that happened during that time, which kind of formulated my kind of thinking around different things. So really important work, and really important to capture those stories so that they're not lost.
Yeah, of course.
And really proud of that work that we did in that expedition.
Yeah, and coming back to that, so the idea that really you were the age that they were when they were doing From the Ground Up, and thinking about how this curriculum kind of ties together those current events. There are things happening now that are being covered in our curriculum, like you say, like climate change, like Brexit, that are coming into expeditions. there was an immediate one that I thought of, that the protest song that was done. I think that was an arts expedition at the end of last year, and where the students had written the words to be about current issues. And there's that sort of, not only are they sort of experiencing that, seeing the effects of that happening politically around them, but they're understanding it through the curriculum, and they're also creating something that ultimately will have a lasting effect on the community. And I think it's quite interesting that our curriculum can not only draw on Doncaster's history and where we are now with it, but in 15 years' time, it might be that there's a different legacy to some of those things covered in the same way in this curriculum.
Absolutely. And you're right. We look at important things in our curriculum. We don't shy away from those difficult conversations, and we look at ourselves a lot. Colonialism has always been part of our curriculum, and looking at those power structures and the legacy of that, and the impact that still has on our institutions of power in the country, and how that holds sections of society back, and is still doing so, and it's opening our kids' eyes to that, because they're the ones who are going to make those structural changes. And that's the hand. We want them to do great things. We want them to make the world a better place, but they've got to understand the world around them, and also the history, where that comes from, in order to do something proactively about that. So, it's we do some important but difficult work.
I was going to say, there's a lot of difficult conversations in that, isn't there? It's like when I sort of think back to what we studied at school, it was kind of, it was talked about in a very different way. It was very much like you had to wait until you were maybe in sixth form before you acknowledged that the sound of music wasn't necessarily about Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer singing nice songs with children, that there was that kind of, there was the Anschluss, and there was Nazi Germany on the rise, and sort of nationalism, and looking at those key themes, and you looked at it on a surface level with those kind of things. It strikes me that from quite early on, these difficult conversations and difficult debates are being had, and I suspect that a lot of that is enforced by crew as well.
It is, and I mean, in answer to that as well, I think sometimes those difficult conversations tend to exist with adults, rather than the kids.
Sure.
So we use experts in our expeditions, and we use experts to help us as teachers and adults to understand where we are as well, in terms of our own learning and our own understanding of some really complex issues. And we want that help, because we want to be able to ensure that our students are given opportunities to think deeply about things that are going to affect their lives, and to think with kind of real objectivity as well, about what they can do in order to make those things better.
Yes.
And you're right, crew is a big part of that. And that is part of our curriculum as well. And so crew is, we have, it's like our pastoral system really, where there are a small number of students, 12 or 13 students, every morning meet up with a crew leader. We circle up, so there's equity in the circle. And we talk through how we're doing, what we need to do to ensure that things are going well for each other. We follow a curriculum that sometimes links into expeditions, but sometimes doesn't. But the kids are free there to voice their opinions, and they do that in a non-threatening environment where they can speak and learn together without fear of culpability or getting things wrong. It doesn't matter. We're here to talk and to help and to support each other. And and that I really want to kind of communicate, Jeff, that's it might say, oh, sitting in a circle and it's all very kind of, hippie and all that kind of stuff. Nothing could be, probably nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing further from the truth, actually. It's really rigorous stuff, and we come together as crew for 45 minutes a day, but crew exists throughout the rest of the day because of that. And there are different levels to crew. We have our crew, but then we have our, year phase crew.
Yeah.
And then we have our whole school crew, And so students are empowered in crew, and they're empowered in our community meetings, and we give them the language and the frameworks to be able to express who they are. And so they'll make stands in community meetings, and they'll make stands for our character values.
Yeah.
They'll make stands for respect, for compassion. They'll make stands for craftsmanship and quality, for integrity, for courage.
Yeah.
So it's very positive, but it allows students to call things out, that they're not happy about. And then what we also do is we nurture students so that they recognise that and they understand where they might have done something. We all make mistakes and we all do stuff wrong, but our kids will then step up and they'll apologise, and they will say, I apologise, I didn't show respect. And we have activism there, because then the students make pledges which they're then held to account for by their crew.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just become I pledge to work harder.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So how are you going to make that concrete?
Yeah.
What are you going to do, and what are you going to show your crew and or indeed the community meeting? And so that's about building culture, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
And that comes through very clearly through crew and through the structures that we have in the school, the common language that we use, the buy-in to our character traits and our habits of work and learning, which we inculcate and we foster and we grow and we nurture right from the very start. When they come to us from across Doncaster, the first thing they do is they get on a bus. We go to Aberdyfi in Wales, and they're in their crews. They answer the guiding question, what is crew? And they they spend a night in the wilderness, and then they climb a mountain together, and they do it together.
Yeah.
And that's equity in action again, because the physically stronger students will help the students who are less strong to get to the top of that mountain. But, when the physically strong students are feeling a little bit sad because they're away from home, the kids who've got more resilience will support them.
Yeah.
And so it builds that idea of, it's about the whole. It's, we're stronger because of our differences.
Yes.
And, we're bigger than ourselves, ourselves, that when we're part of a crew, when we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that feeds through. You can see the thread there through crew. You can see the thread through curriculum. You can see the thread through the very fabric of what we do, and you can see that thread running through our design principles as well. So this is engineered. This is, and we're constantly refining, and we know we've got a lot to do to look at, changing our products from perhaps being a little bit representational to becoming more active. I mean, don't get me wrong, Jeff, we've done some fabulous products, but I think it's right and proper that we're thinking, deeply about, what areas of the community are we engaging with? Are we doing enough around diversity? Are we doing enough around, thinking about our history and how that's formed who we are and sections of our community? Are we doing enough work on, empowering our kids to think deeply about the climate crisis and what they need to do? Are we getting our kids to think deeply about prejudice and injustice? And, and I think that's, speaking personally, I came into education to do that, to make students' lives better and to bring about more equity in our society. And we live and breathe that here. We do that, through what we learn, how we learn it, and then what we do with that learning. And we see the impact that has on our students' lives on a daily basis.
I think you're right, and I think that's one of the things that I feel really fortunate to have experienced, because I'll go in throughout a day capturing video sort of footage for various different projects, and I sort of might see something evolve over the course of a day, and I can think, like you say, about those moments where everything comes through and it ties together. I remember a couple of years ago I was filming a production of Romeo and Juliet that was a final product, and I believe that was about rebellion, and the guiding question was, when is it right to rebel? And obviously those questions were being asked of Juliet's mother in the context of that particular expedition, and what was it right for them to kind of go against the parents in that context. But also in the rehearsals for that, there were, they'd circle up afterwards and they'd say, has anyone got anything to sort of say about this? And people would put their hands up and sort of say, I don't think this person was putting enough effort. But then you'd also go, this person has been, I can see they're trying really hard with it, and I want to appreciate what they're doing with it. So you can sort of see it all permeating and tying together in that, even though in itself, staging a production of Romeo and Juliet about, focused around rebellion is, in the simplest way, activism. It's activism in all those different ways, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and that's our three-dimensional approach, isn't it? We want to create beautiful work, so we wanted to do a fantastic performance that included all of the kids in that year group as well.
Yeah.
If you remember, they were doing, we had about 4 Romeos and 4 Juliets and stuff. It was a bit confusing, but I did work it out. But it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a fantastic piece of theatre.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in amateur and semi-pro theatre that I've walked out of, and it was much, the work that the kids did was much better than that, because they crafted it.
Yeah.
They critiqued it, they crafted it, they drafted it, they sweated it, they knew that it was to an authentic audience.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they step up. So through creating that beautiful work, they grow their characters. And what they do is, we're crew, not passengers. They'll say to people, we'll call each other out, but we'll also appreciate people. I mean, it's really important to say that. That's the first port of call for us, isn't it,
Yeah.
Jeff? Is that it's, are there any appreciations?
Yeah.
And so we'll start with the praise, and, you're right, and our kids will quite rightly identify, it's not the best actor, but the actor who has made most progress,
Yeah.
or the student who's working hard,
Yeah.
who might not have the natural ability, but is working really hard, and as a result, they're making progress. So you get your character growth, your beautiful work, and then guess what as well? Because of the great expedition that was, and the connectivity of, rebellion through time, and we'd looked at patriarchy in Elizabethan times, and women's rights, etc. That all connects together and becomes a really deep learning experience, and one that the kids remember.
Of course.
Because it then ends up with a performance of Romeo and Juliet, which is watched by a live audience and is filmed, and the kids can watch it back, and they're part of the whole production. So, that's great work.
Absolutely. So to sort of tie this up, if people listening want a really good handful of examples of our work that really show, because I think that's the best way, isn't it? To see what the students create, to see how activism works in our schools. Which expeditions, apart from the ones that we've talked about, like Should I Stay or Should I Go, we talked about Rebellion, we talked about From the Ground Up. Are there any more that you can think of that?
Oh, Jeff, we'd be here for another hour, wouldn't we? But, Fight the Power.
Fight the Power.
The work that we've done recently on the suffragettes, on women's rights, and, that fantastic product that's going to come. We're just waiting for kind of sign off, aren't we, from the local authority around Doncaster's suffragettes. Their stories are being told now,
and that's a plaque, isn't it?
And that's a plaque,
yeah,
that's going to go in the town centre. There are countless. Are we really free to choose? Is one that really stands out for me that I was involved in, where the kids ended up producing stunning pop artwork that linked to George Orwell's Animal Farm and the rise to power of Hitler in 30s Germany, and then we link that to fake news and, you know, the media manipulation and how the media uses, you know, politicizes certain news stories to influence how people think. And then the kids did this beautiful artwork, and they displayed that was in Doncaster Art Gallery over the summer in 2017, I think that was. So, you know, I mean, you know, there are endless. I think the best thing for people to do is to visit our website, and you know, we are curating the work that we're doing, and it's all open source. It's freely available for people to look at, and we welcome critique of that as well. So I would recommend that, certainly in the current climate. But the best thing to do, Jeff, is to come and see what we do.
Yeah.
So it's to visit the school and talk to the kids and ask them that question.
Yeah.
You know, because this is happening now as we speak. You know, I mean, there's been some great expeditions this year in lockdown. You know, at the end of last year, our Year 11s wrote that beautiful book of how we did XP, which talked about the legacy of what they'd done in the school, and you know, there are countless ones that, you know, I won't want to offend anybody by you know, missing a really cool one out. So
no, of course. Well, I'm going to say there's plenty to go on there, and that as always, the best thing to do is to visit xptrust.org and look at what we do. Obviously, as well, we say How We XP as a book is a great book to read, and you can get that on the website. So, thank you very much for joining me today, Andy. I think we've covered a lot of that activism, haven't we? Really,
I think so. Yeah, and it's been my pleasure, Jeff. I mean, I hope I haven't rambled on too much.
Oh,
but,
no, absolutely not. No, this is great.
Been really good.
And thank you for giving us a more in-depth look at what activism is in the context of our culture burger.
No problem. Thanks,
Amazing.
Jeff.
So if you're listening at home as well, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have got more content on the way. I believe we're looking at leadership next. So thank you very much for listening.